Okay, so here are all of my eyeshadow palettes, and this really is all of them. I don't have any other quads, little palettes, anything else floating around in my collection that could remotely be called an eyeshadow palette other than what is here. The only other eyeshadows I have are my singles, and I'm actually going to be filming my declutter of my single eyeshadows very soon, but I thought I would go ahead and go through my palettes first. So I'm just gonna go through from the top of the stack to the bottom and show you all of the palettes and show you which ones I'm going to keep, which ones I'm going to keep and depot, and which ones I am going to rehome. So right here on top, I have the Mini Natasha Denona Star Palette, and I know right away that I'm definitely going to be keeping this palette. I use this all the time. I throw it in my bag every time I've done a look that uses any eyeshadow that resembles any of these. I use this palette a lot on the go for touch-ups, and I also really like the quality of these little minis. I know that a lot of people claim that the Mini Natasha Denona palettes don't have a formula that's as good as the full-sized ones. Whether or not that is true, the formula of these mini eyeshadows is really good to me, and I really love these shadows. I love this iridescent blue one. I love the mattes as well, actually. I really like these creamy mattes. So I get a lot of good use out of this, and even though I do own the full-size Star palette, it's down here, second to last in this stack, I still feel like it's worth it to me to have this one around because I use this for a purpose that my larger palette doesn't serve. Next up is this little Smashbox palette. This is the Smashbox Cover Shot Smoky Eye palette. I really do like the color story in here because it is so grungy. So we've got this grungy gold, this grungy silver, this kind of grungy green, which is somewhat unique to my collection, as is this silvery grungy red, and then these beautiful transition shades and mattes that are easy to use, this kind of grungy greenish color. I've really enjoyed having this palette in my collection. However, the last time I reached for it, I didn't exactly shop my stash for it, but I made it my business to use this palette every day for a couple of days in a row because I was starting to feel unsure of whether or not I wanted to keep it, and I actually struggled a little bit with it. I struggled to get the mattes to perform as well as they have in the past. Either that or I've learned more about eyeshadow since I got this palette, and I've learned that these mattes really aren't all that great. But either way, my use of it for several days in a row pretty recently when I was trying to decide about it made me decide that I don't love it anymore. It's this matte right here, this kind of grungy green, that I was kind of keeping this palette for because I don't think I have anything else like that in my collection. But when I used this matte recently, it just came off a little bit powdery. There wasn't that creamy, rich, dark payoff that I expect from a color like this at this point in my experience with eyeshadow. And so I think I'm going to rehome this palette. I've got to say, this is actually harder than I expected it to be because I haven't been reaching for this palette, and I felt really good about decluttering it because I have so much eyeshadow that I really love. But when I opened it and started looking at it and I saw these grungy metallics in here, I remembered why I bought this palette in the first place. I remembered why I like it, and I'm having those feelings like, I'm not sure. But I think it's the best choice. I really do want to let it go. Honestly, I have so much, and the only time I've used this over the past several months was a week during which I forced myself to use it so that I could decide whether or not I wanted to keep it. So even though the colors are beautiful, and I guess that's why I picked this back up to talk about it again. Even though the colors are beautiful and they're very me, and even though I like it, I am letting it go in the interest of allowing the other things that I love more to shine. Speaking of other things that I love more, this is my Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette, and I love this palette. Grungy metallics, all over the lid metallic looks, all shimmer looks. shimmery, sort of rich, powdery, but very pigmented shadows. The original Comfort Zone is such a beautiful work of art to me. I love, love, love this little thing. And I'm sad that Wet n Wild has reformulated not only their formula of their eyeshadows, but also reorganized the shapes of their pans, because I loved this old layout of the Wet n Wild pans. I have no desire to buy the new ones ever. I never even look at them when they come out. I'm just not checking for Wet n Wild eyeshadows anymore, which is fine because I don't need more eyeshadows. But it's a shame that this one is discontinued, because even though it was dirt cheap, it's one of my favorite palettes. All right, this NARS palette, this NARS palette is a little bit on the chopping block, and I haven't decided about it. So, this is the NARS Loaded palette, and it was limited edition. It's no longer available. I pretty much bought it because I love NARS. I bought it because I love NARS, and they had come out with a palette, and it was pretty beautiful. And I've kept it for this color down here. This is a super grungy, kind of silvery, it's like a silvery gold that doesn't have mauve in it. It's really a lovely grungy shadow, and I do get some use out of this gold as well. I reached for this taupe a decent amount, though not lately, and I reached for this lid setting shade a decent amount, though not lately. I'm just not sure about this. I feel like it would be a shame to lose this eyeshadow, but it seems silly to keep a whole palette just for one shadow when I might be able to find a single. And honestly, I would love to give this to someone. I would love to give this to a cousin or a friend, someone who can use it to explore eyeshadow because it's such a nice palette. And again, it's something that I haven't been using very much. So I'm going to tentatively put it in the giveaway pile right now, and then at the very end, I'm going to check in with my feelings and see how I feel about letting go of this little guy right here. All right, the Alamar palette. I pretty much already know what I'm going to do with this one. I am going to depot this palette for a number of reasons. One, I don't really care for the packaging. Two, I'm not sure I want to keep all of the eyeshadows. Those are the only two reasons. I just think that I'll get a lot more use out of these. Oh, and three, the color story of this palette doesn't inspire me. I really love some of these shadows. I really, really love this sort of gorgeous, gooey gold up here. I really like these blues, but I don't think that I'm going to be reaching for this. In fact, I know that I'm not because I haven't been. I don't reach for this palette as a complete palette to do looks. I want to own some of these eyeshadows as singles and declutter the other ones. So I'm putting this in the depotting pile. And here we have my historically beloved Marc Jacobs About Last Night Style Icon number 20. This is a beautiful palette. This is a beautiful palette. It's getting a bit old. I think it's a couple of years old. I don't feel ready to part with it, but I'm also aware that its life might be coming to an end, and I have somewhat of a sense of urgency about using this palette some more and spending more time with it before it goes off. So I'm not only going to keep this palette, I'm also going to try to remember to use it more frequently even than I already do. This palette contains a lot of go-to matte shades for me. So this light gray right here, this kind of mid-tone to dark charcoal gray right here, and some of these mid-toned purpley shades are kind of holding down the fort in my collection as the transition shades for looks that have these tones. So I do reach for this palette a lot. I would like to reach for it more. I would really like to get as much use as possible out of this beautiful baby before it goes bad. So I'm keeping it and I'm going to recommit to it. And my modern renaissance here is the reason that I have terror in my heart about this one going bad, because I believe that I bought my modern renaissance palette maybe 6 months, maybe 4 months before I bought this palette. And this palette has ceased to perform in the way that it used to perform for me. My favorite shadow in this palette, I believe, is Antique Bronze right here. I really like to do looks where I put this all over the lid, and you can just see, you can see by how it's swatched. It's just got this dustiness. I heard someone saying recently that when an eyeshadow goes bad, it's because the binding agent among the pigments has sort of lost its stickiness and become ineffective, so that it's no longer holding the pigments together and they sort of just poof away. And that's exactly what's going on with the eyeshadows in this palette right now, at least the ones that I use a lot. The other one, Real Gar, it's historically been such a brilliant orange, and now when I put it on my lids, it blends out with this kind of dark patchiness. So I am going to go ahead and declutter my Modern Renaissance palette because I'm definitely not reaching for it anymore. And the last couple of times I tried it out to get a sense of whether or not it was still working. I did give it a couple of tries because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't all in my head that it seemed to have kicked the bucket. I just ended up with a completely untenable eye look. I think what I may do is find a friend who doesn't have very much eyeshadow, or a cousin, and give this palette to her for the sake of just these two shimmers, because the shimmers are still performing relatively well. It's the mattes that have given up the ghost. And I think I can probably find someone in my life who would like to have these two little shimmers on hand, or who would like to just depot those two little shimmers and throw the rest of the palette away. My Urban Decay Moon Dust palette. What a beautiful, beautiful palette. And I'm so glad that I shopped my stash for this palette last year, towards the end of last year, because I feel like I reconnected with it and I was able to get a good sense of how useful it still is to me. I feel like I remembered how much I like it. I have been reaching for it intermittently since then, and I am sure that I want to keep it. I think if I hadn't shopped my stash for it that month last year, I might be less sure. So I'm grateful to my practice of shopping my stash for having decided me about this palette in advance. My Urban Decay Electric palette, same story. I just shopped my stash for this last month. It is incredibly useful for adding intensity and depth to colorful looks, for building really exciting, bright, colorful looks. It's an all-around extremely effective palette, and I'm so glad that I have it in my collection. So it's a keeper for sure. My Natasha Denona Gold palette, my pride and joy. This was a gift from my sister for Christmas, and I genuinely could not love it more. I think it's my favorite eyeshadow palette in my collection right now. It's a total no-brainer. You can't pry it from me, I'm keeping it. All right, these are the Juvia's Place palettes that Angelica Nyqvist sent to me as a gift. And whenever I look at them and whenever I open them and use them and swatch them, I get such a warm and wonderful feeling inside because of the spirit with which that gift was given and just because of the joy with which I received it. It was such a sweet gesture and I really took it to heart. I love these palettes because of how beautiful they are and how useful some of the shadows are to me, and I also really, really love them because Angelica gave them to me. I, however, am going to depot them because I only want to keep some of the shadows. But you know what? My main motivation for depotting these is not actually so that I can declutter some of the eyeshadows, because I bet I'm gonna end up keeping most of them. Because I've tried these shadows, I've used them a lot, and I really do have a good use for almost all of these eyeshadows. My main reason for wanting to depot them is so that I can move the shadows around and put them into the context of other eyeshadows, because I don't like the color stories of these, but I really like a lot of the individual shadows, and I find myself reaching into these palettes just for one shadow at a time and using one shadow at a time to build looks with others of my singles. So I'm using them as singles, and it will give me so much gratification and excitement to be able to put them with my other singles, because that is essentially what they are to me. So I'm going to put both of these palettes into the depot pile. All right, second to last, but not least, my Natasha Denona Star palette. I believe this is half empty right now. Yes, it is. I love this palette, again, not only because it's so beautiful and because I get so much use out of it, but because of the joy and pleasure with which it was received as a gift. During my no-buy year, the wonderful Wendy sent it to me. And what I've done to it just this week is something that I frequently do to this palette. I've removed a bunch of the shadows and put them into a little palette so that I can travel with them. I like traveling with some of these eyeshadow palettes along with some other singles, and I love how easy it is to pop these out and pop them back in. I haven't yet really done that with the gold palette. I weirdly feel like I want to leave it intact for a little while, but this is so deeply embedded into my life, and the individual shadows, it's as if each one is its own special piece that gets moved around and used and traveled with and kind of roughed up. I really, really, really love this palette, and I'm definitely going to keep it. All right, finally, the Jaclyn Hill palette. This is also missing 2 eyeshadows because I've jumped the gun a little bit. I already know that I'm going to depot this palette and declutter probably most of these warm browns. I just don't need those. I think I probably really, really love about 1/3 of the shadows in this palette, and I probably only want to keep about half, maybe even less than half of these. I don't really reach for this big palette very much because I feel like it's bloated with these warm browns that I don't really use. So really, ever since I got it, I've been treating it the same way that I treat the Juvia's Place palette. I've been reaching into it for individual shadows and using those individual shadows to do individual things. But I feel like I'll have a better sense of what this palette has to offer me when I have turned it into singles and only kept the ones that I love. Because right now, I open it and I'm sort of overwhelmed by the arrangement and the color story, and I have to swim through the way that it looks and feels in order to reimagine the individual shadows as being useful for me, because the palette itself, as she designed it, isn't actually useful for me. So I'm going to strip all of that away. I'm going to strip away the packaging, the arrangement, the unnecessary eyeshadows, and I'm going to make the remaining shadows truly my own by adding them to my collection of singles. All right, it's time to decide about this NARS palette, and now that the deed is done and I see that I've only managed to declutter 3 palettes, I think that decides it for me. I am going to go ahead with it and declutter this palette as well. It does occur to me that the only real dupe that I had for this grungy silver right here was this grungy silver right here. So I'm letting go of both of the palettes previously in my collection that had that type of color in them. But instead of keeping one of these palettes just for that color, I am going to keep an eye out for a single eyeshadow in this color. And even though I will then have to buy that, it's worth it to me because a single eyeshadow takes up so much less space in my life than, for example, this palette. And it's okay with me to find someone who's gonna really love this and then spend $5 or $6 on a little teeny weeny single shadow that's essentially going to be the same thing for me that this has been. Because for several months, if not over a year at this point, this palette to me has only been the home for this one eyeshadow. So it's time to let it go, and these are the 3 palettes that I will be decluttering. All right, and these are the 4 palettes that I am going to be depotting. The depotting video will be coming to my channel very, very soon. I'm actually hoping to film it right after I finish filming this video. So get excited, keep an eye out, and hopefully it will all go relatively well. I'm going to take all of these eyeshadows out of these 4 palettes, and I'm going to rearrange and declutter them and only keep the ones that I really, really love. All right, so here we have my new and improved eyeshadow palette collection in its entirety. I have 7 palettes here before me. Any of you who has seen my eyeshadow palette collection video from the beginning of my no-buy year will know that at the beginning of my no-buy, around this time last year, I had 9 eyeshadow palettes. So since then, I have received a number of palettes as gifts. I haven't purchased a palette. I haven't purchased an eyeshadow palette since before my no-buy year, but I had received some as gifts, and so my collection was getting a little bit overgrown. And today, through a combination of decluttering and deciding to depot some palettes, I have gotten my collection back down, actually to be smaller than it was back then. I've gotten it down to 7. I feel very, very pleased with this collection, and to be honest, I have been leaning more and more on my single eyeshadows. I'm starting to really love curating my own single eyeshadow palettes. I feel so much more excited about selecting a beautiful single shadow here and there to add to my collection of singles and continuing to curate palettes for myself than I do about adding a bunch more pre-made palettes to this collection of 7 right here. I don't imagine that this won't grow at all. I think I probably will add a palette or 2 to this group over the next year or 2, but I hope that it won't grow by very much. I feel good about this size when it comes to my eyeshadow palette collection. It's a little bit difficult to get them all in frame, but hopefully you can see I'm keeping these 7, I am depotting these 4, and I am decluttering these 3. All right, it is time. The day has come, the time, the moment, the hour is upon us. It's time for me to declutter my eyeshadow palettes. I'm trembling. I think this is gonna be hard because I know that I have too many, for me, of this type of product. I also know that these days what I really lean on for eyeshadow are my singles. I constantly rearrange my singles, make custom palettes. I'm making new palettes every week. I sit down and I make a new palette, and then I reach for that palette. It's like I have something new every week because I create something new with my singles. I just have drifted away from my former devotion to pre-made eyeshadow palettes. And for that reason, I think there are a number of really stunning palettes in this stack, or in these 2 stacks, that I can part with. And the reason that I can part with them is that I know that I can place them with someone who will really, really love on them and get a ton of really good use out of them in a way that I won't, simply because my focus has shifted to singles and to custom making my own palettes. And that has come along with my kind of growing knowledge of and excitement about makeup. So the more I get into makeup, the more I get into custom color combinations, and the less I get into prearranged palettes. And that means that I feel ready to place many of my prearranged palettes in the hands of people who I know who are less obsessed with makeup and who will appreciate this format of eyeshadow more than I am able to appreciate it, especially when it comes to some of these that I've had for a really long time. I think I was able to get at least a corner of each one in frame, at least a piece of each one in frame, so you can kind of see what we're dealing with here. These are all of my eyeshadow palettes, all of the ones that I have at some point or another decided to keep and to own and to use. But it's too many. I can't keep them all, especially because I'm reaching for my singles so frequently. I think I'm just going to stack them up and go through one by one. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to stack them up. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lay them all out, and I'm going to pick my true favorites. I'm going to pick out my true favorites, and then I'm going to stack everything up against those. All right, these are my favorites. These are the ones that all 4 of these kind of gave me the same leap of joy in my heart when I when I saw them. So when I was looking at all of them laid out, it was a no-brainer. I grabbed this, I grabbed this, I grabbed this, I grabbed these, I grabbed them, and I was like, these, like protecting them with my life, right? These are my ones, my onlys, my bests. So this is the Natasha Denona Gold palette. It was a gift from my sister, which just adds to the glory that I feel when I use it. You can see that it's kind of taken a beating. I did try to clean up some of my eyeshadow palettes before I sat down to do this. Last night I went through and I tried to clean some of them up. I did that partly so they would look nice and clean for the declutter, but also because I find that when I've cleaned something up and it looks nice, it helps me with the idea of giving it away. Like once it's really nice looking, I'm like, I could give this to someone. I would be excited to give this to someone. So that's another reason that I cleaned them all up. But this one I didn't bother. It's really hard to clean this fuzzy stuff, this like foamy stuff. And I also know that there's no way that I'm going to part with this one. So this is a definite keeper. I use it a lot. This one unexpectedly has just risen to prominence. I super, super love these shadows, and I've never been much of a purple person, but it's more these like grungy reds. It's really the reds in here, these like grungy cherry reds that get to me, and I end up digging into this a lot. Also, I dig into it a lot to take the shadows out and put them in singles palettes. And actually that's kind of interesting. This palette, and the Daydream palette, the third one that I reached for, all three of them function as composed palettes of singles for me. And part of the reason that I love all three of these so much is that I use them when I'm making my own custom palettes. So these shadows all live here in this palette, and you know, the Natasha Denona Lila palette, these shadows all live in here. They always return to their homes. But one of the things that makes me so attached to these is that they're super functional for me with my way of kind of mixing and matching and making custom color combinations. And actually I had to fetch a couple of shadows out of here from my current custom palette to pop them back in, and a shadow or two from here as well. So I'm always kind of moving these around, and these all get a lot of love from me. They're my all-time favorites. This is the Alter Ego Daydream palette, Natasha Denona Gold palette, and Natasha Denona Lila palette. And then these two Rowan palettes are new to me. I recently did a pretty thorough first impressions of them, and I'll talk about them again in the upcoming video about how I spent my budget. The short story is the creasing is disappointing. I really wish that they didn't crease in the way that they do. They crease no matter what I do. I can help it a little bit with putting a tiny bit of powder on top of them. That helps it a little bit. But there's nothing I can do, not even glitter glue will keep them from creasing at all. Nothing will make them behave like a powder shadow because they're creams. But I love everything else about them. And the thing that I like the most, besides the finish, the way that they look, is the ease of use. They're so easy to use, and I've actually worn them more than anything else that I have eyeshadow-wise since the day that I opened the package, because they're so easy to just pop on the lids, smudge on the lids. They look sexy, they look casual, but they also look glamorous. They look like you didn't try too hard, but they're very flattering. And then it's just as easy to pat out the creasing. So the creasing is worth it to me. I have grown to absolutely adore these. As you can see, it looks like I've had them for a year. You know what I mean? Like I've gotten a ton of use out of them. And it's probably partly because they're so new to me that I immediately grabbed them. But I also think that they really suit my lifestyle and my makeup preferences. So they've become super precious to me in a short time. I think I might actually add one more to this, and that's going to be this Viseart palette, which was sent to me as a gift from a subscriber who was decluttering it. And that's because there's not a black in any of these palettes. And I love a black. I worship a black. I always use a black. And I've been dipping into this Viseart Neutral Mattes palette a lot for its black, because it's a very good quality black. I also really, really love this ruddy red in this palette. The black, it's not swatching very well. I actually don't think these shadows swatch very well. Here are those. What happened? I tried to swatch those Natasha Denona shadows, but they had already rubbed off of my hands. They're probably all over the palettes. Yeah, look, there's one. There. I'm a mess. Anyway, I really like this palette as sort of like a go-to palette for rounding out looks. And these beautiful sort of neutral taupes, this gradient of neutral taupes is very useful to me with my style when I decide to go in and kind of make a gradient on my eye. So if I was building like a perfect little capsule collection from my larger collection of eyeshadow palettes, these are the 5 that would be in it. It would be Lila, Gold, Daydream, or the 6, I guess, if these count. It would be Lila, Gold, Daydream, the Rowan shadows, and then this one basically as a utilitarian tool for completing my eye looks. So what I'm trying to say is that this would be enough for me. Like, this could be it. There are no greens in here. There are definitely dimensions that are missing from this group, but I have that dimensionality in my singles. So when I look at what I have here, and I think about what I'm really drawn to, what I really love, and what I really wear a lot, this would be enough for me. So I'm going to keep these right here in the corner. And one by one, I'm going to go through what's here and I'm going to stack it up against these and think about whether it makes sense to add what's here into this kind of capsule collection, because I really, really want to whittle it down. I need a bit of a fresh start when it comes to eyeshadow palettes because my collection has become overgrown for me. All right, I'm just digging into it. This is hard. Let's start with Wet n Wild Comfort Zone. This has been one of my favorite eyeshadow palettes for a long time. I love the vintage look. I love the shapes of these pans. I love how pigmented this dark brown is. I love that it's an all shimmer palette and I get super editorial looks from this. Back in the day, before my know by year, before Rowan eyeshadows had entered my life, before I was the recipient of Cleona Cosmetics PR, before I had any Natasha Denona eyeshadows, you know what I mean? Like back then, this really unusual all shimmer drugstore eye palette that is iconic was a highlight for me in my collection. It was so special. And for that reason, I'm having a hard time parting with it. But the reality is that there are 2 things. One, I haven't reached for it in months and months and months, and I don't want to because I have so many other eyeshadows that I really want to play with. So when I say I haven't reached for it, my reaction isn't to go, so I've got to shop my stash for it and I'm going to make sure that I get good use out of it. That's not how I feel. The way that I feel is I haven't reached for it in months. I'm not going to reach for it for months. And there's a lot of really good life left in this. And I don't collect eyeshadow palettes the way that I collect books, for example. It's, 20 years down the line, I'm not going to be like, I wish I had kept Wet n Wild Comfort Zone so that I could just take it out and hold it and look at it and think about the history of makeup and think about how iconic it is. I don't feel like that about this. I feel like it's perishable. And I thought I would never give it away, but I'm going to give it to someone who will keep loving it in the way that I used to love it. I do have people in my life for whom that will be true. And so I want space more than I want to keep this and everything that it represents to me. So I'm gonna pass this on. This Lauren gave to me, Lauren May Beauty. It's a Lise Wattier palette, and I was so impressed by the quality of these eyeshadows, and I really loved digging into it for a month or 2 after she gave it to me and after I kept it in the reckoning. Now I think about my Rowan shadows. This provides a really similar kind of quick, easy look. I think about the purples in the Natasha Denona Lila palette. These nudes are just so run-of-the-mill color-wise. I love the super dense creamy formula that's in here, but it's kind of like a palette of singles to me. Like I have so many singles with which I can do similar things. I've noticed since I've had this in my collection that when I want a quick, easy eye, I'm reaching for the Daydream palette or I'm reaching for my singles palette of the week. Even though this could work in that capacity and perform beautifully in that capacity, it's not actually ever my first choice in that capacity. So I love it. I understand why it made it through my reckoning, but similar to Comfort Zone, I think I can place it with someone who will spend more time with it than I ever will. And I don't have any of the same emotional attachment to this as I had with Comfort Zone. So I kind of feel like if I can let Comfort Zone go, then I can let this one go as well. Ooh, hard ones. All right, here's Kevyn Aucoin Nude Pop. And I feel like this is really special, and I still feel like this is super unique. When I look at it, I get sort of this leap of joy and excitement. It still feels fresh to me. This eyeshadow right here is the one I always think of. It's beautiful and creamy, and it performs beautifully. And I don't really have other eyeshadows like this. I don't even really have other singles like this. I also really, really love this very, very strange, almost like grungy oil spill eyeshadow. And even though I've acquired more shadows like this, I mean, in a similar vein, since receiving this as a gift, I still go back and reach for these kind of flaky, weird, shimmery Kevyn Aucoin shadows from time to time. So I feel like this is unique enough and aesthetic enough to stay, to keep living in my collection for now. So I'm going to add it into the pile, and I'll double check at the end of the video and make sure that that's really the decision I want to make. All right, the little Natasha Denona Star Palette. It's so beautiful and so useful, and it also doesn't take up very much space. So I've never really had a reason not to keep it. And I still feel like it's a no-brainer, like keeping it is a no-brainer, but I'm not sure. I'm going to put it down here with the full-size Star Palette and maybe decide about them at the same time. Let's talk about Temptress. This is an Alter Ego palette. It's the first palette that Alter Ego ever sent to me. I kept it because I had always wanted the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette, and it's a dupe for that. And I was so impressed by the formula. I have since become an Alter Ego affiliate because I'm so impressed by the formula. I really think that they're doing good things. Also, I kept this at the time because I wanted to always have like a dark brown and a dark black to reach for. And these have been my go-to deepening shades for a long time. I'm constantly grabbing this palette and deepening up the outer corner with one of these two eyeshadows. However, in this context where I'm really trying to whittle down my collection and I'm trying to be ruthless, this is kind of a boring palette for me. Everything that I can do with this palette, I can do with singles. And I would be more inclined to reach for my singles than to reach for any of these. The formula is gorgeous, but the formula of all of my singles is also gorgeous. And a lot of what I can have from this, I can have from this stack here, and in palettes that I kind of cherish more for various other reasons. So on top of that, this would make an amazing gift because it's such a special palette and it performs so well. I think I'm ready to part with this one. This was a limited edition Lancome palette that came to me through Octoly. And similar to the Kevyn Aucoin one, when I look at this, I feel like all these little feelings. I feel like this bright palette is making these palettes are like throwing off the white balance or something. Hopefully that's better. This is a cool palette because it has really interesting creams in it, like this navy blue cream eyeshadow. It makes me feel like I don't need to ever have a dark eyeshadow stick color because they're, well, this is a powder, but they're just these really rich, strange creams with glitter in them. And that glitter becomes super shiny and sophisticated over the course of the day, and it also provides something for the powders to adhere to. And these creams don't really crease. This is a super special palette is what I'm trying to say, and I still feel that excitement of freshness when I look at it. This is one that I feel like I haven't been reaching for enough lately, but I do want to shop my stash for it. I do want to get more use out of it. I still feel like it's like on the cutting edge for me in terms of what I want to be doing with my eyes. So it sort of occupies a place like Comfort Zone in that it's languishing, but I feel so differently about it. I'm going to go ahead and keep it for now, and then we'll check back in about it at the end. Okay, we're getting into some tough ones, some tough decisions. So here's Urban Decay Moon Dust, and here's Urban Decay Electric. I have obviously loved this palette a lot. I've hit pan on 2 of these shadows. I just don't reach for it. I just don't reach for it frequently these days, you guys. I've been reaching for it more lately to layer lithium and granite on top of the Rowan shadows to try to set them a little bit. And I've actually found that these glitter shadows don't work as well to set the Rowan shadows as some other powder shadows that I have. Gosh, I have a lot of emotional attachment to this as well, because this is like the first full-sized, hefty eyeshadow palette that I ever purchased. Before this one, I had owned some of those smaller, one of those smaller Too Faced palettes, the Naked Boudoir Eyes or something. I had owned it, panned it, bought it again, panned it again. This is the first time I went into Sephora and bought something like kind of editorial. This was like my first in a weird way. So it's hard to think about letting it go. Similarly, the electric palette, I bought it when it was way on sale, and I don't know if I should declutter this because it's my only source in my collection for intense, bright fluorescent shadows, because I'm not a collector of rainbow palettes. So even in my singles, I don't own any blues like these, and I just don't own these. I don't have any other neon shadows or fluorescent shadows. I think I feel good about keeping the electric palette. I do dig it out from time to time, and I'm like glad that I have it. It opens up possibilities for me that I wouldn't have in my eyeshadow collection if I didn't have it. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the keep pile as well. So I'm feeling torn about this, and I'm feeling like I don't particularly want to declutter it. I'm not like, yeah, that's definitely one that can leave my collection, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to hang on to it for now, but I'm going to really hold my feet to the fire about this one at the end of this video. I'm just going to put it aside for now. The Deuce by Juvia's Place I kept in the Reckoning because a lot of these shadows are really extraordinary, and Tarte is like this really cool, rich, reflective duochrome. I really love Crepes, this blushy shade down here, but I just haven't reached for it. And I think one of the things I love about this is that I feel like this is a well-curated editorial palette, and that the times that I used it, the times that I wore it, it kind of guided me towards eye looks that I wouldn't have otherwise created. And I really appreciated that. And that was the main reason why I kept it. I was like, there's something here for me. There are eye looks here, there are ideas here that I might not come up with on my own. But it's just sat in my collection ever since then, and I've never reached for it and opened it and allowed it to do that for me because I'm too busy getting my hands into all of my singles and creating my own ideas and living my best life with my own vision. So I don't want to depot this like I did with my other Juvia's Place palettes because I really love the story together. I love the color story. But I do think I don't need to keep it. I think I have so many eyeshadows, and it's not a situation where I'm like, I have dupes or I can do this with other things or blah, blah, blah. It's just a situation where the passion isn't there with this color story for me, and that's enough of a reason. I'm going to pass this on. Oh, you guys, we're getting down to the hard. This is the hard. It's hard because, is that okay? Like, you can see my water that I'm drinking. You can see my vanity. I just don't want to hold my hand over it the whole time, but that's okay, right? I knew this was coming. I've kind of already decided to let this one go. It's hard because I bought this. It was $99. It's like the upgraded version of my first, when I bought this. You know, this was the first time that I like invested in a luxury palette because I knew that the colors were right for me and it had something to offer me that I didn't own. When I was really getting into makeup, it's a stepping stone in kind of my evolution that brought me to where I am now. I learned so much from this palette about color. I love the formula. It's got that kind of mix of neutral cool tones and neutral warm tones. It was such a great touchstone for so long. And it was my favorite palette that I had in my collection for a long time, from the time that I purchased it, probably all the way up until gosh, like until I received the Star palette as a gift from Wendy. And then this became my favorite. I never thought that I would give this away. And if I hadn't become a YouTuber, and if I hadn't gotten into a situation where I was receiving a bunch of new palettes and new eyeshadows all the time as gifts from friends and brands, if that hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't be decluttering this, because I wouldn't have purchased all of these eyeshadows, these palettes. I wouldn't have purchased enough eyeshadow palettes to make my collection big enough so that I would be in a situation where I would want to whittle it down to the tune of whittling this one away. But I am on YouTube, and I did receive all of these palettes, and my tastes are being allowed to kind of explode out into all of these different formulas and newer things because I'm on this platform. That's just the reality of my life. I'm not passing judgment on it. I'm not asking for judgment, and I'm just saying, like, I'm letting the reality dictate the decision that I make about this, rather than what I always thought I would do and how I always thought I would feel dictate the decision that I make about this. The real nail in its coffin for me is the fact that it's so beautiful and it's in such good shape and the formula is so good. I can't wait to give this to my friend. I can't wait to give this to my friend and show her how to use it and like just up her eyeshadow game with it. And then to know that she's going to be wearing it and wearing it and wearing it, and that I would maybe have never reached for it again because I have this. And I just feel like that's a much better choice. That's a better fate for this. I'm going to pass the love on and hope that it multiplies instead of clinging to the past in a way. It's all about accepting the life I'm living and loving the life I'm living instead of the fantasy, of someone who would have like used this until all of the shadows were panned. That isn't what happened. So it was expensive. I love it. I loved it. It's perfect for me in almost every way. And yet it is time for it to move on and live a second life with someone else. All right, Star palette, it's your time. I am struggling with this. Oh, we're out of focus. Come on. Okay. I'm struggling with this. I actually can't see myself giving this away because of all that it represents to me. I think it's a situation where I have like the emotional attachment and it's too soon for me to let it go. The reality is I just don't reach for it that much. I reach for my other two Natasha Denona palettes 20 times before I think to reach for this one. The thing is, I do reach for this when I'm traveling. I frequently pull out some of the singles. And until the day that I stop doing that, I think I want to keep this. It's like the other two Natasha Denona palettes. It's like an extension of my singles collection. And the gift, the way that it came to me, the gift from my subscriber Wendy during my no-buy year, who I now know, I've met in person and we correspond. It's okay, I think, to hang on to something for sentimental value. Not everything. Like I'm not like a comfort zone, for example, it was time for it to go, but it still sparks joy for reasons that go beyond the quality of the shadows themselves. I think I'm going to let myself off the hook for this one. Even though if I'm really honest in terms of practice and in terms of in terms of how it fits practically into my makeup routine and in terms of my feelings about the individual eyeshadows, this one could be on the chopping block if I'm honest with myself. I'm gonna let myself off the hook about that for now. But you know what I think I might do? I think I might go ahead and give this as a gift. I found it's been so useful to me for so many years because, not so many years, but for about a year since Jennifer gave it to me. And this too has that sentimental value. It was such a special moment. She's the first subscriber I ever got to meet in person, and she's so lovely. But it is the mini version of a larger one that I already have. And I've recently acquired some really tiny magnetic palettes that makes it easy to take little eyeshadows with me when I travel. So I've been tending to lean on those little magnetic palettes instead of grabbing this. So the thing that it was the most useful for, it's almost like I found something else that works super well in its stead. If I'm going to hang on to the full size one, And this is in such good condition and would be so lovely for someone else to adopt. I think it kind of helps me decide if I give this one away, then I feel like there's balance, and it also makes logical sense to me. All right, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to hang on to the full-size star. I'm going to part with the mini star. Let's reconnoiter. Let's see how things are going. Okay, so we're at 9 like larger palettes, full-size palettes, and then these 2 little guys, which are kind of like portable singles in a way. I'm going to go ahead and set these aside because they're no-brainers, and they're kind of not even in the same realm as the rest of these. This is really the situation. This is really what we're dealing with. I'm actually going to open them all up real quick and take a gander. Well, you can see all the palettes. You can't see every eyeshadow. Some of them are edged out, but you can see all of the palettes. And this is really interesting. There's so much kind of warm, reddy purple stuff going on. But each one of these is definitely special to me in its own way and useful to me in its own way, especially the first handful that I picked out. I can see that the electric palette is super different, and I also know that it's super different from any of my singles. So I have no reservations about keeping the electric palette. I definitely do think that Nude Pop, this Lancome palette, and the Lila palette they're a little bit similar. They're not exactly the same. Each one of them has unique qualities, but there's a little bit of redundancy there. But I don't feel like I need to get rid of any of them. I have really, really warm, glowy feelings about each one of them individually. So that doesn't bother me, the fact that they're kind of all in the same world over there. Gold is totally unique. It's cool. It's cool to see them all open like this. This is the one. This is like the main one I feel that I need to decide about. One of these could kind of go too. I'm going to close them all up and kind of pull those out and have a chat. Okay, so these across the top are the definite keepers, and these 3 are the ones that I feel are a little bit second string. Here's the thing, Moon Dust. When am I ever going to privilege these over those Clionadh Cosmetics singles that I recently received? Like, when is this ever going to be better than that? The only answer to that I can think of is that Lithium and Granite are these kind of grungy neutral glitters, and I don't own any. There aren't any grungy neutral glitters in the Clionadh collection. They're all colorful, but I do have kind of neutral grungy colors in these Rowan formulas that are really unique and super glittery in a way that these aren't. So for that reason, I think that I can go ahead and part with this. And again, find someone a tango dancer who's really going to love wearing these glittery eyeshadows to tango. I have to be honest, I might play around with it a little bit more after this declutter. And if I decide to keep it, I will report back in a future video. But I think I might be able to make my peace with this. I think I might be able to pass this one on. So in theory, looking at these color stories, in theory, I would get similar eye looks out of these 2 palettes. But when I think through what I actually tend to do when I reach for them, it always ends up quite different. So I often tend to reach for these 2 shadows when I reach for the Kevyn Aucoin Nude Pop palette. And there's nothing like these 2 shadows in here, right? There are these plummy shades, but they don't have the same oil spill effect as this amazing kind of duochromy grungy one. And then when I reach into this palette, I tend to reach for these navy blues because they're so unique to me. I just don't have navy blue eyeshadow anywhere else. And I also tend to often warm it up with this kind of poppy pink. And the Nude Pop palette doesn't have those either. So even though they seem like they kind of grew on the same tree, in practice, they're really different palettes for me. So for this declutter, I'm going to pass them both through, and I'm just going to keep a close eye on them in the coming months, and they will be on notice for future declutters. All right, so here's what I'm keeping. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 palettes. And here's what I will be giving away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 palettes. For some reason, the camera's having a hard time focusing on this situation. So I have successfully, unless you include the little Rowan singles, but even if you do include them, they're so little that I have successfully cut my eyeshadow palette collection nearly in half. And that's good. This feels good to me. About 8 palettes, give or take some little guys, feels good. And I feel like there's room for 1 or 2 to enter my collection from the Purgatory box, and I still will feel like I'm dealing with the roughly 10 palettes that make me feel the most functional as a user of eyeshadow palettes. And having actually gone through it and done it, I actually feel very good, very at peace about passing on the Natasha Denona Mini Star, the Comfort Zone. I actually feel very at peace about passing along the Moon Dust palette, because even though I see potential when I look into this palette, I see potential in this like bright red duochrome glitter, I just know that I have so many other colors that show me the same potential in different formulas and different arrangements, like singles that are easier to rearrange. And it's not like I'm boxed out of making any looks that I would make with this because of giving it away. So it was a tough decision, but now that I've done it, 2 minutes after I made the decision, I feel amazing about it. So this is good. I feel like I did what I set out to do, which was to ruthlessly cleanse my collection of eyeshadow palettes. And here is my edited collection. This is going to be much easier to store, much easier to focus on, much easier to hold in my Makeup Mind palace, and much easier to get really good use out of. I feel like I can love each and every one of these palettes fully, and I wasn't able to do that when I had all of those other ones gunking up the works. This is what the acrylic container looks like from above. And then I just took this big one out because I knew that the camera would just focus on the top of it and you wouldn't be able to see the whole thing. So this one usually sits in the very back and leans up against the wall. And then these ones all have a place. Wow, this acrylic container is really dirty. And these are the rest of my palettes. These are my pre-made palettes. Gosh, I don't know if any of them, Okay, I opened them all up because it's always fun to see what everything looks like, what all of the innards of the palettes look like when they're exposed. This is the Natasha Denona Gold palette, Natasha Denona Lila palette, Kaleidos Sci-Fi Green. This is the Alter Ego Artemis palette and the Alter Ego Daydream palette. This is the Flower Beauty Jungle Lights palette, the Persona Cosmetics Identity 2 palette, the Nabla Mini Nude palette, Nude Cutie, and the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. I think that for this video, I'm not going to be able to go by process of elimination for the entire video. I already know that it's going to be a long one. I'm relaxing into that. I'm not too worried about it being long. But I think that for many of my categories of makeup, I'm really just going to be kind of scanning and pulling out things that I feel prepared to declutter rather than doing like the deep, intensive like process of elimination thing. But for my eyeshadows, I feel like I can go, for my eyeshadow palettes, I feel like I can go by process of elimination because there are so few of them compared to like how many lipsticks I have, for example. So I definitely know I'm going to go through. Well, is that process of elimination or am I just going through? I am just decluttering. Okay, I am definitely going to keep the Kaleidos Sci-Fi Green. I love the eyeshadows and I particularly love this deep black. This is like the blackest black eyeshadow in my collection and you know, it's absolutely not going anywhere. The Natasha Denona Gold palette and the Natasha Denona Lila palette are also not going anywhere. I love these on their own merits, and I also love using them as singles when I'm building custom palettes. The Flower Beauty Jungle Lights palette is not going anywhere, and it's pretty much because of this shade right here. This is one of my all-time favorite eyeshadows. I reach for this palette like an unfair amount compared to my other palettes just to put this shade all over my lid. I use it so much. It's like this stunning sort of silvery pink, really, really rich and creamy. And I find that it's kind of like neither warm toned nor cool toned, if that even makes any sense. It's so pretty. I want to put it all over my eyes like right now. And it's weird. It's not even like there's anything intensely unique about it. The quality is very good. I really like the way that it applies, but it's not like you can't find shadows like that anywhere else. And it's not a duochrome or anything or a multi-chrome. I think there's just something really gratifying about the combination of this color with this super creamy formula and the big fat size of the pan. There's just something about it. All right, process of elimination. I'm definitely not going to give away the Persona Identity 2 palette. I find it to be one of the most useful pre-made eyeshadow palettes of all time. It's just so versatile. It covers so many bases. And I very often reach for this when I like just need something. If I'm doing an eyeshadow look with something else and I'm like, oh, I need X, I'll often end up reaching for this. The formula is really good too. Okay, these are the four that, it's not like I'm going to declutter all of them, but they're the four that I don't have as strong feelings about keeping as I do about these ones. I am going to keep the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. I'm never attracted to these like ketchup and mustard color stories in eyeshadow palettes, but I actually find myself reaching for this much more frequently than I expected to. I go into this kind of like warm, light bronze a lot. I often use this shade, Awakening, on my brow bone. And I really, really love these mattes. I really love these kind of like ruddy mattes. So I'm going to hang on to this one. I've been sitting here for kind of a long time just thinking, and I'll tell you what I've been thinking about. I have not been imagining that I would want to declutter the Alter Ego Artemis palette because I reach for this a lot when I'm trying to dupe the vibes. I think it's because it's got these blues and greens in it. And a lot of times when something comes out on the market and I look at it and I'm like, wow, that's alluring me in a way that's different from the things that I usually use and the things that I have. I don't have anything like that. A lot of times it's because it has like these blues and greens, or sometimes these like really grungy, swampy greens. And I just don't feel like I have all that much eyeshadow that has those shades in it. And so then I dupe the vibes and I go looking for shades like that and I find them in here. So I was thinking when I came to this declutter, oh, I definitely want to keep Artemis because it provides this whole realm of eyeshadows that I don't really have. But I just decluttered my single shadows and I have a lot of those colors in my Adept singles, like these blues, shiny blues, matte Prussian blue. I know that I could probably dupe the vibes of this palette like 100 times over with my singles. So that makes me feel like maybe I can let it go. But I just don't feel like I have that many palettes right now. Like I don't feel like my palette collection is busting at the seams. And so I don't want to get rid of it just because I happen to have some other shadows that are similar to it. I actually feel kind of inspired by this palette, by like having it and looking at it. And so I think I'm going to keep it just because I would just be decluttering it to say that I did. Like, I'd just be decluttering it to declutter it. I feel like between it and me, its time hasn't really come. So that was what I was sitting here thinking about. And it's a roundabout way of saying that I'm going to keep this one. I don't think I want to let go of the Daydream palette either. I haven't used it as much as I was using it when it was new. When this was sent to me in PR, I used it almost exclusively for like months. I just found it to be so useful, and I got a variety of things. I could get a really glam look from it, but I got a lot of really easy to wear day-to-day looks from it. And I do go into it to pull the little magnetic pans from time to time when I'm building larger palettes. Again, it's like it's not my beloved right now, but I just don't feel like its time has come. The Nabla Cutie palette, though, its time might have come. And it's because there's something about these mats. They're like kind of crumbly on the surface. It's like they've developed crumble surface, crumble pan, as opposed to hard pan, you know? When I dig into them and I rub my finger around in them, they kind of melt and they get really creamy. And I am you can see kind of the wetness, the wet creaminess in that. And I'm such a sucker for that. And oh my gosh, did you see how that sort of smeared? That is why this palette has made it through so many declutters. But in practice, when I go to use it, and I actually had a very recent experience with this because it was the final palette in my advent calendar of makeup I already owned. So I opened it on the last day, the 24th, and I used it on that day. And what happens every time happened, which is that I look into it and what I want to do is to build a look out of this shadow, no doubts, because it's so gooey and delicious. But in order to turn it into this lovely smeary thing, I have to warm it up with my finger, and then it's like something that's very kind of not goopy, but damp. Like, it really is damp. And then it's sort of difficult to blend out on the eyes. Like, it doesn't blend like a powder. And to actually get this effect on the eyes, I have to kind of build it on my eyes, and then it's tough to blend around the edges. It's tough to get a smooth blend around the edges. So the thing that I'm keeping it for, which is the swatch, is not actually the effect that I'm getting on my eyes. And when I try to get it, it doesn't blend well, or it's kind of awkward, a little bit patchy, or it builds up so much that it kind of like recreates its crumble pan on my eyes. So every time I look into it, I want to use that. I feel disappointed. There's also kind of crumble pan on the black, even though it swatches beautifully. And so I struggle to use it to deepen up the outer corner the way that I like to do with the black. And so what I always end up doing is just a single all over the lid look, just with Seducer. And it is beautiful, and the look is beautiful every time, and I'm not mad at it, but I don't need to keep this whole palette just to get a look with this. Like, I could get the look that I get with that one shadow with a bunch of other singles that I have and shadows that I have. I'm pointing to the Daydream palette because there are some in there that would get me that same exact look. This is all just to say, oh, and one more thing. I didn't miss it when it was gone. I didn't even notice that it was gone, and it was in the advent calendar for an entire month. So its time has come. Okay, so again, this one will go in the back, and there it is. That's my entire collection of palettes. This is how it looks when I'm sitting at my vanity. So on this side of the screen are my palettes. This is my existing palette collection. And on this side of the screen are all of the palettes that have come my way in PR recently. They're all trying to make their way into my collection. They're all contenders. And I think it's also time for me to look at my existing eyeshadow collection and assess it and just double check and make sure that I actually want to keep everything that's in it. So this is going to be kind of a combination palette collection, reckoning, and maybe declutter video if I decide to get rid of any of my existing shadows. Basically, I'm looking at everything new and old
and deciding what I want to keep for the foreseeable future. I think what I'm going to do though is to start with the new ones, like start with a reckoning, rather than doing like a purge of my collection in advance of deciding what I want to keep. These days, I am trying to take a little bit more of a relaxed and natural approach. I really just want to keep what I love and pass along what I don't love without worrying too much about numbers or anything like that. Okay, this is all of the new stuff. This is actually in the wrong place though. This is the Alva 2 highlighter palette from Odin's Eye. I just put it in my stack when I shouldn't have because it's not an eyeshadow palette. So I'm gonna kick it out of this video. I'll reckon with it another time. Looking at what's here, I feel like fantasy is trending, which I actually think makes sense because of how strange and difficult the last year has been. I mean, everything has this sort of like sparkly, starry, soft, dreamy quality to it. And I think that that might be something that we continue to see. I hadn't really thought about it until this moment. Very pretty. I am attracted to this kind of dreamy aesthetic, but I do tend to prefer it when it's grounded in something, like the way that the aesthetic here is grounded in a sense of contemporary art and in dark colors, and the way that it's grounded here in a reference to the natural world, like a reference to the stratification of gems. I tend to prefer that over just this totally pastel, sparkly, illustrative fantasy that we have going on in the Odin's Eye palettes. But it's all very pretty. It's quite a pleasing little collection that we have here. And I think that what I need to do is just start with the ones that I absolutely know that I'm keeping. I'm definitely going to keep the Club Nebula palette, Angie's collab with Kaleidos. I absolutely love the packaging. I never thought that I would enjoy such thick, chunky packaging, but when it comes to this palette, I wouldn't have it any other way. I just think it's beautifully executed. I love the artwork. I love the matte finish. I love that it's a little bit soft feeling. I love the mechanism by which it opens and closes. It's just, I haven't even talked about the eyeshadows yet, but in every way, physically, it's very pleasing to have it in my collection. And that is something that is important to me. I love beautiful things for all sorts of reasons. And this is very beautiful. Here's the palette. I did do a review and demo of it. As you can see, I've been using it. My experience with it has been very, very positive. I find that it doesn't disappoint me in terms of my ability to get dimension in my looks because it has these dark mattes in it, but it also always pushes me in a slightly more colorful direction than I would naturally go. And I appreciate that. This is a real gem and I'm happy to keep it. The quality of the shadows too is pretty inspiring and exciting. The other thing that's here that I am unequivocally going to be keeping that you couldn't pry from my cold dead hands at this point is this palette, Samantha's palette with Ofra, the Life's a Draft palette. And it's simply because of this face product right here, this cheek. This is currently my favorite blush. It's the best powder blush I've used in a really long time. I think there you actually can get a pretty good sense of why I love it so much. Do you see how it's sheared out and it's so glossy? So there's that kind of fleshy color there and that glossiness. I just feel like it looks so much like a really beautiful glossy cream cheek, but it has the ease of application of a powder. Especially for me lately, I have blemishes. I'm trying to add color to my cheeks without picking up too much of the spot conceal that I've put down on my blemishes. And I've found that this is easier for me to work with than my cream cheeks, but it gives me that glossy shine that I'm after. I'm just so impressed by this, and I've worn it almost every day since it arrived. I like the eyeshadows too. I'm not mad at them. The formula is good. And I have been dipping into them from time to time just because they're convenient colors to have around. So I've got this sitting on my vanity because I'm reaching for the blush so often. And then, you know, I dip into it to deepen up a look or to blur my crease or something like that. But the reason that I am so confidently keeping this, the reason that I really, really want to keep it is this product right here. And the rest of these, I'm not sure about. I think I'm going to actually open them all up so I can kind of see what I'm dealing with color-wise, color story-wise. All right, it's a little awkward, but I managed to get all of the eyeshadows in the frame, I think. And I'm glad that I did this because it really does help me. It has helped me kind of clear my head about it. Let's talk about these palettes from Odin's Eye first. So this one I haven't touched, and it's very pretty. I've actually been pretty impressed. This is the first time I've tried Odin's Eye. They sent me all of these palettes. I've been pretty impressed by the eyeshadows. If they had just sent me this, for example, like if they had only sent me this little palette, I'd probably keep it just because I know that I can get good looks out of it. Some of these colors are really pretty. The formula is good, etc. But because I have other Odin's Eye palettes on offer, and because I haven't touched this, so I can give it away untouched, and also because I just kept the Club Nebula palette. You know, like everything that I could do with this, I could do with Club Nebula. For all of those reasons, it's easy for me to just give this one away. These other two small ones, I really enjoyed using both of them. One of the things that impressed me, possibly the thing that impressed me the most about these, is that those really bright shades in the center, that split pan, is so shiny, like so incredibly shiny, and really lights up a look. That is just pretty fierce. Actually, that probably shows the quality better than anything. I started to wipe it off, and the pigment, it's like this kind of crushy mica. It got dispersed and spread out, and just look how glossy that shine is. It's so pretty. I have other glossy, shiny things in my collection. I have other neutral eyeshadow, other red eyeshadow. I have other green eyeshadow. I think that I can happily pass these along, even though I enjoyed them so much, and even though those center shades really excite me. I just don't need them. I don't feel like I'll miss them if I don't keep them. Let's look at these three big palettes. These are such fun, pretty palettes that it's a little bit harder to decide to let them go than it was with the little ones, the minis. The other thing about them is that they're very satisfyingly designed. Like they have this sort of slightly soft quality. It's like there's a little bit of padding, just a little bit inside of the cover. So they just feel very juicy to hold. I really like the way that they've designed these physically. So I like them. They feel neat and solid and just attractive. And again, that contributes to my desire to keep them and own them. The first one that I can easily just eliminate is this one. Even though it's so pretty, it's the most neutral. In theory, it's the one that I would like get the most use out of in the day-to-day. I have other shades like this. You know what I mean? Like this isn't original to my collection. It is a really beautiful palette for yellows. Like these yellows are really pretty. And I do think that the mattes are really good from Odin's Eye. But I've had this in my possession for some weeks now, if not over a month, and I haven't really wanted to use this. I haven't been inspired to reach for it, so I'm just going to give it away. I swatched it a tiny bit. I like these bronzes, and I really like bronze, but I found that these deeper bronzes in here, all of them lean quite warm, like really orangey bronzes. If they hadn't leaned so warm, then that would have maybe made me think twice about giving this away, but as it is, I'm perfectly happy to give it as a gift. Now, of these remaining two, again, in theory, this is the one that I would like better because I think that if I were to design an eyeshadow palette, it would be more likely to end up looking like this than to end up looking like this. I'm not saying it would end up looking like this. I'm just saying that this is the likelier of the two because it has these deep, murky mattes. It has this kind of like mixed, sparkly, glossy amber shade. It has this really interesting grubby kind of green, pale green. There's just a lot to love about this palette. There's a lot for me to love about it. I think it's really cool. But of all of the palettes that Odin's Eye has sent me, this is the one that I immediately opened and started using, that I keep reaching for during makeup playtime, that I've actually worn on camera. It's the one that presents the most diversity to me, and in that way, it's the one that excites me the most. And it too has some grubby colors. When I look at it, I immediately see like this periwinkle and this matte soft teal, but it also has this kind of like mustardy shade in there, which is really cool. And it even has some neutral deepening shades in it. This palette, which is the Alva 2, has really brought out my playful side, and I don't think I'm done playing with it. So I'm going to hang on to it. But I think that definitely means for me that I can give this one away, because I've, again, barely touched it. I've swatched it a tiny bit, but I haven't really applied it to my eyes. And even though I do like the color story of this, I do think that it's a bit all over the place, but it just works. Like, it just hangs together. And some of these shades are really pretty. Even though that's true, I don't feel inspired by it in the same way as I do feel inspired by the Alva 2. And I also know that any colors that I wanted to put together, any looks that I was inspired to do by this color story, I could get those looks just with other shadows in my collection. So this one's gonna go. Okay, I successfully made it through that pile of Odin's Eye palettes, only keeping one. But we have yet to decide about Luster Charm from Alter Ego. When this palette first arrived, I was really excited about it. I think I said in the first video where I showed it, I said that I had been excited that it was on my vanity every morning when I had woken up. And that remains true. I still feel like it's really, really pretty. I've applied this shade a lot all over the lids. Ugh, I'm going to get myself into trouble. I feel like I'm doing that thing where I was prepared to not keep it, but now I'm starting to swatch it and it's going to make me want to keep it. But I think I can let it go. What I was angling at is that even though it's really lovely, and I'm excited that Alter Ego came out with something like this, I actually feel like this is my favorite Alter Ego palette. Like, it's my favorite one that they've come out with. Even though that's true, I love it, and I have a lot of other shades like it, and I'm just more inclined to reach for my singles than to reach for this, especially if being able to reach for this means keeping an entire extra palette. I've also found that the special shades, or the imitations of Pat McGrath's special shades in here, which is this one, Sacred, it does swatch really pretty. It applies really beautifully. And if I didn't have, for example, the Natasha Denona Gold palette and the shade Kava in there, if I didn't have my Tom Ford single, which looks a lot like this, I would definitely keep this. But compared to those, it's a little dry. So it's always going to be like my last choice when I'm looking for something like this. Yeah, I can let this go. I love it. I think it's great. The design too. I love the packaging. I really like the cover of this way better than the other palettes from Alter Ego. I'm very drawn to it, but it doesn't mean that I have to keep it. And I think I'll be happier with a slightly smaller collection. Okay, so those are the decisions that I made about all of the palettes that have come my way recently. I decided to keep these three for now, and I'm going to give away this whole pile. My palettes, my little palettes. So this is my little palette collection. And this is kind of just to show you, like, it's sort of just a palette collection video, like an updated palette collection video. I don't know if I'm going to declutter any of these today, but I do want to kind of go through them and consider them one by one. I'm going to see if I can open them up and get them all in frame. Hey, gold palette. Hey, friend. I think that these quads from Rowan are going to present a problem. It's going to be harder to get everything in frame if I continue to include them. And I also know that I'm going to keep all three of them. I really like these quads. If I were going to get rid of one, I would get rid of the cool one. These are the two that I use the most. but I'm happy to just keep it. It doesn't take up a lot of space. I do really like this cool toned kind of dark taupe shade. I don't particularly feel like any of these three is, weighing me down. So I'm just going to go ahead and show them to you, keep them, get them out of the frame. They're also kind of like blowing out the lights. Okay, I'm just going to start making decisions and, talking you through, sort of gently, quickly talking you through. The one that I'm holding in my hand right here, I'm definitely going to keep. This is the Flower Beauty Jungle Lights palette. It's actually great for YouTube. It's great for swatching. I often end up comparing this formula. It's a really good creamy drugstore formula that I sometimes end up comparing to high-end formulas, usually to the detriment of the high-end formula. And I do really love wearing this shade on my eyes. I reach for this a lot. Like, it's one of my most worn shades. So I'm definitely keeping this. The Persona Cosmetics Identity 2 palette, a perennial favorite, one of my most useful palettes, in large part because of the beautiful matte black and matte brown, really good transition and blending shades for me. And then the colors that are in here are these kind of like deep murky colors. I just find this palette incredibly useful. I reach for it all the time. The Natasha Denona palettes, these three across the top, aren't going anywhere. I clearly love the gold palette. I also really love the Lila palette. This sunrise sunset business, I don't actually love it that much. I don't really like the color story, but I do find myself opening it a lot. It's funny. It springs to my hand frequently. I really like this warm copper. I like the mattes that are in here, and I love the packaging, and I like the color of it. Like, it's attractive to me in a lot of ways that aren't necessarily equaled by my passion for the color story, which isn't very strong, but I want to keep it. So I'm keeping the three Natasha Denona palettes, but gosh, I feel like the Artemis palette down here, it's great. And this too is a Natasha Denona color story, right? This is like an alter ego dupe. It's great, but looking at it here, I just feel like everything in this palette that I want to use has a comparable shade in the gold palette. Like, even though there are some shades in here that aren't in the gold palette at all, you know what I mean? Like these oranges and stuff. I feel like if someone was like, use the Artemis palette to create a look, I would be like, okay, happily, because it's really beautiful. But then I would end up creating a look that I could have created with the gold palette. And even though I've had this for a long time and I've clearly gotten good use out of it, it's been really fun to demo on YouTube. I'm glad that I got to review it. And in making like vibe dupes for looks that have inspired me and palettes that have inspired me, I have found this to be relatively useful. Even though all of that is true, at this stage, I kind of feel like I'd rather just keep panning the gold palette. And I think that getting this out of the way will help me do that. And I also don't think I'll miss it. So I think I'm going to go ahead and let that one go. And honestly, I think while I'm at it, I really do love this palette, the Daydream. For a long time, again, I've had this for a couple of years, and for quite a long time, I would say most of the year after I got it, I used it a lot. I reached for it a lot. This is the best palette that actually Alter Ego has ever sent to me in terms of how much use I've gotten out of it. But looking at what's here with all the palettes open, I kind of feel the same way. Like, I think all of the looks that I might do with this, I could get those same looks with a combination of Lila and Sunrise Sunset business. And I think that I would rather just keep leaning into them, keep panning them, and using them over and over again. Wow, I really didn't expect to be doing this, but I think that I'm okay parting with this one today too. Once again, I can't fit them all in frame, but we're left with this. These are the ones that I had put off to the side. So my collection has become more colorful today, but I kind of like that. I feel like neutrals, like the neutrals that I kept, the Natasha Denona shades, I can just lean into them and use them over and over. And y'all know that I use my singles a lot. Like this collection of palettes is just an addendum to my collection of singles, which is very versatile. So it is great that the palettes that I've ended up keeping, like this one and this one, the ones that I've ended up keeping, like that are kind of newer to me, they inspire me, they speak to me, they really like have a stance and a statement more than some of the ones that I decided not to keep today. So I feel like this is going to work for me. So this is my new palette collection. There are 9 of them, not including the Rowan quads. Quads, I mean, some people count them as palettes, some people don't. I would say that I have 9 palettes now and 3 quads. And that suits me very well. Again, especially because I tend to reach for my singles so frequently, I feel like this is just a true abundance of eyeshadows for me. And now I have a number that I decided that I'm not keeping and that I can give away. And I really love to give makeup away too. Here are my eyeshadow palettes as far as I know. There might be some like sitting around in other places. We might come across some others as we go through, but this is the brunt of them. I love this acrylic storage thing for eyeshadow palettes. I'm definitely going to pack that up and take it with me. And the question before me now is, do I want to pack and transport all of these eyeshadow palettes, or is there 1 or 2 of them that I can leave behind? Okay, I'm kind of going on instinct here because I don't have time to hem and haw, and I also don't want to stress myself out too much. I'm not trying to curate a perfect collection in this moment. I'm just trying to get through this monumental task. This Glossier monochrome palette, I can let go of this. I kept it because I reviewed these and I really loved the colors, and I do still really love these colors. But I have a lot of eyeshadow. I don't like these formulas. I'm just not going to use this again. It's time to let it go. It also occurred to me going through these that this little Victoria Beckham brick, if I'm going to have any powder eyeshadows with me, these might be good ones to have. This is an incredibly tiny thing. Like, it doesn't take up any space. It's the size of a credit card, basically. So I'm going to set this aside and consider it as one of the pieces of makeup that I might keep out of the boxes when I pack, but all the rest of the palettes are going to get packed. Okay, I think I know what's going to happen here, and it's going to be pretty scandalous. The Victoria Beckham, the Smoky Eye Brick in Silk. I got this for review, and I didn't like using it, and then when I did the look on camera for the review, I ended up really liking that look, and I was like, maybe I need to give it another chance. It has some good qualities. If you want the details, then go watch that review, but I don't use it really, and also the clasp doesn't work well. It's like, it gets knocked open easily. All it does is rattle around in my makeup case, popping open and just like being open and being annoying. Not keeping that. These absolutely wonderful Kaleidos quads, which I recently reviewed. Well, this one is untouched, right? I didn't apply this in the review, so I'm going to give that away untouched. Even lightly used powder products like this can also be donated, and I'm going to do that with this too, even though these colors are so extraordinary. I had a great time using this. For me, it was really just for a video. It's not going to be my everyday. If I keep it, I might use it 2 more times tops, you know? And I'm not keeping things that I'm only going to use 2 more times tops. Let's talk about these Rowan quads. Absolutely classic pieces of makeup from my collection. They haven't used in kind of a long time, and that I recently used again in old makeup that still slays. I recently pulled out the original, the 75 degrees warm, used it again, and it totally slayed, and I was reminded how incredible this formula is, how much I love it. It's just so good. However, I think you can see from this, so what I was going to say actually, however, because my absolute complete intense
intense love affair with these Rowan quads is kind of over, and it's become a situation where they're just like old favorites that I sometimes use again. I don't feel like I need to keep all 3 of them. I'm trying to keep a small enough makeup collection that it'll all be in rotation. That's kind of what I want for the new year, and 3 of these is too many to realistically keep in rotation. The only question to me is whether I should declutter 2 or just 1. I know that I want to keep 75 Degrees Warm because these 2 brownish taupes are bae, as they say, so that's in. These 2 each only really have 1 shade that is bae, and they both kind of have that gray quality, that gray taupe quality that I was talking about that always just makes me feel like I look a little bit dull. I need that slight warmth, that like neutral bronze warmth in this realm. This one has it more than the other one, but I think I will be okay letting them both go. I really did love 1111, especially because of this super textured. I know that if I swatch this, I'm gonna want to keep it. This super textured, yeah, that makes me want to keep it. I was going to say, but 1111 kind of has the gold version of that, but it doesn't really. It's not the same. It's not the same as that. I wish that these were magnetic and I could rearrange them and I could put this in this quad. Here's the thing though, I haven't thought about that eyeshadow, this one right here. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but I'm thinking about it now. 52 Degrees Cool is going to go. It was never my favorite. It was always my least favorite. I kind of want to keep this Nabla quad. I got it for review and I was doing a Beauty Bay review and I've really barely touched it because of where I've stored it. They're pressed glitters that kind of have like an adhesive pressed into them, which is pretty impressive. But you know what? Even though they're great and just like, you know, pressed glitter is pressed glitter and it works really well for me and I like these colors, swatching it right now, I'm just not really feeling the love. I don't feel the way I felt about that creamy eyeshadow from the Rowan quad. The feeling I'm having is like, oh, this would really be practical for me because I like this kind of thing, so I should probably keep it because why wouldn't I? But that's not enough for me right now. I think I'm gonna declutter this Nabla quad and let that be the excuse for keeping both of these. You know, I'm gonna try to use this more in the coming months. If I don't, I'll go ahead and declutter it, but these are the only 2 small eyeshadow palettes that I'm keeping, like the only 2 quads in my entire collection. So I think that it's okay that there's 2 of them. Eyeshadow palettes occupy such an interesting place in the mind and heart of the makeup lover. I think that they are the kind of makeup that lasts the longest. It's like the hardest to use up an eyeshadow palette. It's easier to use up a concealer, foundation, even a blush. But I think that for a lot of us, eyeshadow palettes are also the most compelling kind of color cosmetic. And a lot of people, both on YouTube and off of YouTube, a lot of you at home, I think, collect eyeshadow palettes in the way that one might collect books for a library. And the thing is, because they take so long to use up, if you collect them the way that you collect books for a library, then you only end up using each individual palette about as frequently as you might read a book in your home library, like maybe once or twice a year if that book is lucky. Of course, that's drawing it through to its most extreme conclusion, but you take my point. A lot of people have more eyeshadow palettes than they have any other kind of makeup, and yet they take the longest to use up, and that leaves an eyeshadow palette collection in kind of a unique position when it comes to the space it takes up, the way in which it's in rotation, the way in which we interact with it, the literal space that it occupies both physically and in the mind and heart of the person who loves and owns the makeup. I think that a lot of my friends who have huge eyeshadow palette collections have made peace with the idea that it's like a library. That's what they want. And I absolutely have no criticism of that decision. If it's a conscious choice, if you enjoy having that kind of abundance, then go and get your life. And I love that for you. But the choice that I've made for myself, the conscious choice I've made, is that I don't want that. And my desire for a really small, manageable, edited eyeshadow palette collection, it doesn't necessarily come from a place of feeling like I need to use up my palettes. I mean, you know, the big difference between books and eyeshadow palettes, one of the big differences is that makeup is technically a perishable good. It's a consumable in a way that a book isn't. So a book, you can read it once or twice a year and you can do that for the rest of your life. But an eyeshadow palette, you use it once or twice a year for a couple of years and then it's expired. But that's actually not my
my reason for wanting to downsize my already relatively manageable by many people's standards eyeshadow palette collection. My reason is simple. I want to simplify. I just don't want to have this many choices. I don't want to have to keep some of them in storage and one or two on my vanity and rotate them out, which is what I've been doing for the past 6 months. It hasn't really been working out for me. I haven't really been using most of my palettes. I've kind of been forgetting that they're there. And then they sit there in storage with what is for me this kind of clogged static energy. I would rather have nothing there than have them sitting there in storage waiting for me to remember them and rotate them out once or twice a year. So my goal, because of what will feel best for me, is to edit this down to a number of palettes that can actually fit in my vanity drawers and be considered every day. I want to be able to just look at all my eyeshadow palettes every day and be like, which one of you do I want to use? And for this to turn into that, I'm going to have to let go of most of them. Okay, we're going palette by palette, and I am throwing myself a softball to begin with. This is the Samaya palette. This is a good one to start with because here's the thing. Even though I absolutely smeared this palette in my review, if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's a very detailed and interesting review because I kind of wanted to like the makeup, but then I really didn't. In that video, I was like, I'm definitely not going to keep this palette. I hate it. That was basically the gist. But every time I think about actually decluttering it, I struggle because I love this shiny black so much. There's just a little part of me that doesn't want to let that go. But I know that I'm not keeping this palette, especially on this occasion, the occasion of this really serious, thorough declutter. It is an easy decision, but it has a little bit of a pang. And that's why it's a good one to start with. Maybe that pang will help me sort of break the membrane of reluctance to get rid of anything that sometimes constrains me at the very beginning of a declutter. This is one that I actually think I want to keep. This was a gift from my friend Khaki, the famous Khaki of Khaki Reviews Beauty. One of the things I'm doing in this really vicious collection-wide declutter is I'm not letting sentimental value keep me from decluttering stuff. So I've let go of a couple of really precious gifts from really precious friends for really practical reasons. We'll see how the collection looks at the end, but here are the reasons why I think I'm going to keep this. It's very, very fresh, right? Khaki just gave it to me as a gift a handful of months ago. Many of these palettes here have been languishing in my collection for years. This is the NARS Summer Unrated palette. It's from this year, so it's got a lot of life left in it. And then, I like it. I've used it several times, but not enough. I used it for, I would say, close to a month after Khaki gave it to me, and then I switched it out for something else on top of my vanity, and I haven't used it since then. So it's like this fresh, beautiful NARS eyeshadow palette. It's fun to reconnect with NARS because it's a brand that I used to really, really love, like so much that I couldn't resist buying way too much stuff from NARS before my no-buy year, before I changed my spending habits. I had all these passionate feelings about NARS, and I haven't owned an eyeshadow palette from them in a really long time. So it still feels like a juicy, special opportunity that I haven't really yet taken full advantage of. I still feel like I'm looking forward to using it. I still feel really excited to have it. And I think that it could have a place in my edited eyeshadow palette collection, which is the place of a palette that sort of dictates a color scheme to me, where I pull it out and I try to use just it and it sort of leads me in a direction that I don't usually take. These sort of peachy colors aren't my first choice for eyeshadow, but this palette is interesting. It has like a rust quality and even a little bit of a pinky berry bronzy quality that pulls it back from being too orange. So in this first round, this is a keep. But we shall see. There's going to be a final reckoning at the end. Okay, Kaleidos Sci-Fi Green. This is the first of what I think is going to be an interesting category of makeup in this declutter. It is a palette that has removable pans, and there's one eyeshadow in it that I really love. It's this black. It's the best black eyeshadow I think I've ever used. I'm constantly reaching for this palette and opening it just to use this black. It hasn't lost its power after many years, and this palette is many years old. I'm also constantly popping it out and including it in my custom palettes. It's super velvety, super pigmented. It performs exactly the way I want a black to perform, and I would really, really miss it if it were gone. But the other 5 shadows here, I never use them. So I'm going to take out this black. I still can't find my depotting tool. It might actually be like lost forever because it's been months. I'm a mess. I'm going to declutter the rest of this palette, which I don't usually love doing because I try to give my eyeshadow palettes away to friends and family, even the ones that I've used a little bit. But this one is so old that I'm not going to do that with it. So I feel okay breaking up the party and just keeping this, my precious, and adding it to my single eyeshadow collection. Okay. Now we're cooking with gas, and we're going to have to be because it's time, y'all. Look at this. The titans are falling in this declutter. That's what I think. The titans being, well, I don't want to speak too soon. This is one of them. This is part of the issue, but even if this hadn't happened, it would still be time for this to go. This palette is 4 years old in my collection, but it was a gift to me from my friend Lauren of Lauren May Beauty. She had had it for a while and then she decluttered it from her collection. So it wasn't brand new when I acquired it. Even though some powder products can outlast their expiration date by years and some of them seem to go forever, in my experience with Natasha Denona eyeshadows, they go off after a couple of years, especially the mattes. I mean, particularly the mattes. They just don't blend in the way that they did when they were new. And in this one, even some of the shimmers have started going off. I love including this shadow, this one, that one, this one. Like, I love these sort of grungy, rusty wine, taupe, and ashes of roses mattes. These are some of my favorite mattes to include when I'm making my own palette. And I also have really enjoyed this one right here. It's kind of an unusual, slightly purplish deep brown. I've used this palette a lot as a resource, and the last couple times, not even couple, the last several times, I would say for the last year at least, when I've included these mattes and even the shimmers that I like in custom palettes, I've tried to use them and they just haven't performed. Its life is over. I have to admit that and let it go. That was the Natasha Denona Lila palette. Sorry, I didn't say the name out loud. The Flower Beauty Jungle Lights palette. This was a gift from Lacey, and I have loved it so much. I actually filmed an entire video reviewing this, like a dedicated review of this palette. It's a really, really great formula. Especially for a drugstore palette, I mean, it can't be beat. It can't be beat at the drugstore, and there are a lot of high-end and luxury brands that can't beat this formula either. I was dead set on decluttering it, and now I am causing myself to struggle by swatching, in particular, this pink. Because here's the thing about this palette. All the shadows are good because they're all the same formula. But this one, this sort of silvery, slightly taupey, grungy pink, this palette is really all about that shadow for me. Like, it's just that. I only reach for it for that. Since I reviewed it, and on the occasion of my review of it, I used some of the other ones. But since then, I've only ever reached for this palette to use that pink eyeshadow. What happens is I'm looking over my collection and I see it and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna put that pink eyeshadow all over my lids today. I love that look. And I've done that a ton of times, but that makes it hard for me to keep this palette through this declutter in particular. And these aren't magnetic. I can't pop them out the way I could that Kaleidos eyeshadow. I could try to depot that one shadow by going through the whole process of heating it up and softening the glue and trying to pop it out, and it might break and then I might have to repress it and all of that stuff. But here's why I'm not going to try to do that. Okay, they're really not the same. I think of these two shadows as sort of being the same. They're really not the same. Well, on my finger, once they're swatched, they look much more similar than they do here spread out. And, you know, built up on the lids, they're both going to take on this kind of silvery intensity. But it's because of the texture, that really satisfying, crushy texture, that they occupy kind of the same place for me in my heart. This, the Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction palette, is one of my most used palettes. Since I got it for review, I've used it constantly, like weekly and often multiple times a week. So even though they're not the same, I've been kind of feeling like, oh, I have that crushy sort of silvery pink in this palette, which I'm definitely keeping. This is making me want to just like see if I can pry it out even without softening the glue. This might be a disaster. Yeah, it's not coming out. It's really stuck in there. So I'm gonna declutter this palette. You know, if it's like keeping me awake at night, then what I'll do is I'll just come and dig some of this eyeshadow. It's really, really creamy, and so I think it will reconstitute easily. I'll dig some of it out and like I'll empty out a metal pan of one of the singles that I declutter and I'll press it into that pan if I'm really feeling that serious about it. But I think maybe I won't be. I think it's okay, you know? It's like beautiful things come and beautiful things go, and you don't have to hold on to them forever. And this has served me really well. And there are all of these other beautiful eyeshadows, beautiful things in my life. It's gonna be okay. If I declutter this and don't retain that shadow, it's gonna be okay. And I really feel that. I'm not just trying to tell myself that. I really genuinely feel that. It's like my heart is okay with letting it go. And my mind, this rational part of my mind is like, but it's so great. You have to keep everything that's so great. But my heart is okay with letting it go. And that's what matters. Needless to say, she's staying. I've been keeping my Moonlit Seduction palette in this cardboard packaging because I have another Mothership palette, Midnight Sun. Probably my biggest criticism of the Pat McGrath Mothership palettes is that they all look exactly the same from the outside. This black packaging, this beautiful lacquered black packaging that, you know, I love objectively. When these two palettes are floating around, they look exactly the same and I genuinely don't know which is which. I cannot remember which, like there's no way. And so I find myself opening them and just hoping that I've got the right one. I can't imagine how frustrating it must be for people who have more than two if they don't keep them in this packaging. So I think what happened to the packaging of this one, the cardboard part, is that Smidge destroyed it. Back when I first got this for review, I was fostering a kitten and she got a hold of it and it was just completely wrecked. I wish I had them both, you know, because it would be really pretty to be keeping them stored that way. But at least this way, I don't get them mixed up. And, you know, Midnight Sun is staying. It hasn't ended up being the most versatile palette for me, but I love the dark brown. I love this kind of creamy, slightly metallic blending shade. When I want a dark green, this is the first one I think of, but this is really the star. It's the best wet look shadow that I have. And I actually use this almost the most of any of my palettes because I'm constantly opening it. I keep it like right on my vanity, right within reach because I'm constantly opening it just to, you know, get that shadow. This, the Harmony palette, it's the newest palette from Alter Ego. I like their formula. You know, they're decent, very inexpensive palettes. A good option if you really, really want to play around with a color scheme that they carry. You're not really sure you want to commit to something more high end. The formula is good enough for you to kind of like get it, but I definitely don't need to keep this. I've used a couple of them because I wore it in a video and, you know, I swatched it a little bit so that I could make sure the formula is still performing, but it's in good enough shape that I can easily give this one away to a friend. Okay, this one, the Kaleidos Flower Punk palette, curiously, this is one that I have kind of been dreading because it's like every time I think about this declutter, I think about this palette and I think I don't want to get rid of the Kaleidos Flower Punk palette, but it makes sense to get rid of it. And so it's going to be like this weird moment where my heart and my brain are clashing on this one, but in the other direction. My heart wants to keep it and my brain is like, Hannah, you never ever use it except for when I'm trying to dupe the vibes. I will often turn to this when I'm looking for like a color that I don't have a lot of. But even then, I often think I'm going to find the vibe dupe in here and I don't. I don't use it. I don't usually put this on my eyes. The thing that I love about it is everything except for its use value to me. I absolutely love this packaging. The mirror is this like magnetic panel. I might be wrong, but I think that this was limited edition. It's not available anymore, which also makes it defunct as like something with which to create content that might be relevant to people. But let me get back to saying what I love about it. So I love this like mirrored panel that slides off so that the palette is then just elegantly free of that sort of flapping mirror that other palettes have. The artwork, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And the way that it's like painted onto a mirror on top, slay. And then I love the color story. It's not for me in practice, but I love the execution of it. I love the relationship between the colors, the level of saturation of the colors. I just think it's designed so well in every way. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this in my keep pile. It is gonna be a thing that I declutter at the end if I feel feel like I kept too much. Maybe it'll make it easier once I see the edited collection and I see how out of place it is as something that I never use. Maybe that'll make it easier for me to let it go. But if I end up with a pleasantly tiny collection at the end and this is part of it, I might keep it. And who knows, maybe it'll inspire me to use colors like this more. Okay, this is the one that I bought myself. It was recent. This is part of Pat McGrath's holiday collection this year, like this holiday. It's this little quint. It's called Bronze Bliss. I did review this and apply it on camera. I've kind of come to suspect that the formula is a little different than her usual eyeshadows. I've heard a lot of people say that. My experience kind of does bear that out. They're just a little bit less super intensely packed, pigmented, controllable in every single way. I usually use brushes with Pat McGrath's eyeshadows because I think that they're really meant to be manipulated to the absolute finest point of precision and control with a brush. These don't feel quite like that. I like use my fingers with them and buff them out and sort of fluff them all over the place, a little more like normal eyeshadows, like shadows from other brands. However, the colors, the textures, everything about it is perfect for me and I use it all the time. Funnily enough, when I did that review, this one, because it has kind of a coppery tinge, is the one that I said disappointed me the most. I was hoping it wouldn't be coppery and it would be more of a neutral bronze. But this is the one I've ended up using the most. I constantly open this palette and put the merest touch of this all over my lids just to give them a tiny bit of sheen, like a satin sheen and a tiny bit of depth. But that coppery warmth makes it really blend into my skin and makes it just almost look like it's of my skin. A subtle makeup look. I mean, I've worn it again like once or twice a week, every week since I've gotten it, worn it in that way. And sometimes I'll go in with the other ones to accent and make a more complex look. So this is definitely staying. The Gucci palette. I'm keeping it, y'all. I actually love using it. One of the things I'm looking forward to, as I am with all of my declutters, is having fewer things so that I can use the ones that I love more. I actually love the looks that I get with this. I did a full review of this, so if you want to know everything, it was like a year ago. Try to remember to link it. I was very thorough about the formula in that and the colors. But here's how I'm feeling a year later. It isn't the top quality creme de la creme of formulas when it comes to longevity. Sometimes I get a little bit of that kind of creasiness. And maybe I said this in that review, I can't remember. It's these ones, you can actually see they're the ones that I've used, right? Like this one, and this one, and sometimes this kind of rusty red. But it's really these three, and especially these two that I've used the most. I love the sort of ever so slightly satiny shine finish. I love the way that looks. And when it starts to crease later in the day, it doesn't look too bad. It's a little bit of like soft Rowan vibes, like a little bit of that editorial creasiness. At this point, that's probably my main complaint with this formula, but it doesn't bother me that much, you know? They're on the softer side, these shadows, you know, but I am as in love with the packaging and the color story as I was before. I love to see it on my vanity. I love to open it. I love to look at it. It was also a gift from my husband. I think I might not keep this bag anymore. It's looking like pretty ratty, but I'm going to keep this. I'm looking forward to having it shine as a member of my much edited eyeshadow palette collection. ColourPop, it's a mood. Has been so great to have, endlessly useful when it comes to single shadow building my own palette videos, endlessly useful when it comes to duping the vibes. I quite like the ColourPop formula. I really quite like it. And this kind of has everything, and all of the shadows are saturated or sort of off pure, like slightly grungy in the way that I like slightly in the jewel tone direction or slightly in the muddy direction. It's just been great. However, I'm not going to keep it because it's not my precious. It's useful, you know, but even when I use it to dupe the vibes, use some of these shadows to create palettes, those shadows in those palettes, those little custom palettes that I've created, are never my favorite of the ones that I've included in that palette. You know, they're just these sort of useful stopgap, checks all the boxes things. It's like they check all the boxes except the box of specialness and the box of lighting me up and making me feel those warm, fuzzy feelings. I'm not even gonna pop out any of the shadows. If I were to do that, I would probably take Ritual. I love a pressed glitter. I'd probably take Wanna Go. I end up using that one in a lot of custom palettes. I even love Echoes. This was in my most recent custom palette and I've used it a lot. But there's no part of me that's like, no, I don't want to see it go. Every part of me is like, yeah, this is something that can get weeded out in the interest of simplifying and intensifying the specialness of the collection that I keep. Okay, these Viseart palettes. This is kind of a tough one as well for me, sort of for similar reasons. These were PR. They were sent to me for review, and they're fantastic. I haven't decided about these yet. Like, I just don't have clarity on it. I think that this is a case where my head is saying keep them. Intellectually, it's like keep them, and I'm sort of looking for reasons. But my heart is saying they're so practical, and then they don't have that like gooey deliciousness feeling. Like I think about my Pat McGrath palettes and they feel gooey and delicious to me. And these they feel like really reliable, really well formulated, high-end makeup. I love this packaging. This sort of foldable, they'd be so great for travel. It's really sturdy. I feel like they're really well protected in there. It's also compelling on a tactile level. Like these little palettes feel good to hold. They feel good to have around. And I'm constantly popping shadows out of here to include in my custom palettes or duping the vibe and stuff like that as well. I find them really, really useful. I just don't want them anymore. I don't long for them. Like if someone took them away from me, I wouldn't long for them. I think it's because Viseart is all about matte shadows. You know what I mean? Like this is an all matte palette, and this one is half mattes and half shimmers. Again, really practical, but I just don't like the shimmers very much. I think these will make really great palettes for someone else. That's the way that I'm going to make this make sense for me. All of the great qualities that I've just been expounding upon, those are the reasons that these are going to really please someone else and work really well for someone else. They're just not a match for me. I've been making good use of them. I've been doing my best. They're just not the kind of thing that makes my heart double beat. All right, shall we do it? We're getting down to it. Here we go. The gold palette. Absolutely my precious. Probably my favorite eyeshadow palette that I've ever owned. A gift from my sister. You know, there's like a lot of sentimental value here, a lot of love, an absolute icon in the history of the YouTube channel, Hannah Louise Poston. You know, it's just like defined and contextualized so much of what I've done, so much of the way that I've talked about eyeshadow and doing eyeshadow and choosing not to buy eyeshadow and all of that. It's just been such a banger for me. It's really old, right? Has it been 4 years? I think it's exactly 4 years old. And you know, what I said before about Natasha Denona shadows applies even in this case. I haven't noticed these going off as much as I've noticed the Lila palette. The ones I tend to use the most in my custom palettes are this one, Dijon, and this one, this bronze, a soft, kind of light, but very neutral bronze. And of course, Kava and Sparks. I haven't touched this shadow in a long time, and it's still really beautiful. Wow, I have feelings. Swatching it is reminding me of what it always was about this palette that slayed. You know what I mean? It was this kind of like crushy, slightly green shadow all over the lids, and the way that it would light up the eyes with this like faceted kind of greenish gold. I really love this shadow in the abstract, but I don't like this color on me. So that one doesn't really make me want to keep it. And the mattes, the only matte I ever really loved from this palette was the brown, but I actually think that this is one of the ones that feels like it's sort of going off. Sorry, I have it's a little bit of a Salt New York blush stuck under my thumbnail from when I was organizing things earlier. Welcome to my life. This is one that feels like it started to underperform to me, the dark brown. And I have dark browns that I really love in my Pat McGrath palettes. What I'm doing right now is I'm trying to decide if I want to keep any of these as singles. I think that that's probably, it's tough to break it up, right? One of the things that I love about this is how strong and focused of a color story it is. So many palettes these days, they try to do everything. They try to give you everything, and then they kind of fail at doing anything truly inspiring. They stay too close to home, too close to the comfort zone. They don't feel cohesive because there's always like those safety shadows mixed into whatever strong colors the brand is trying to excite you with. And this, it's such a pure, powerful punch. And I love it for that. And I've always loved it for that. So it's tough to break them up, but This palette has got to go just as like a physical thing in my makeup collection. It's taking up space that at this point has become unwarranted given how little I'm actually opening this and using it as itself. So what am I going to retain? Like what am I going to keep from it? Swatching Oro here really makes me realize that I don't need to keep it. I love the crushy luster on the finger, but you know, it becomes a bit more dull in the swatch. These other three though, I think, yeah, these still have a lot of life left in them, and it'll be fun to have them around as a reminder of what I loved about this palette. Obviously, Kava and Sparks are my most used eyeshadows from here, but they've been replaced. They've gotten old. They don't perform the way that they used to, and you know, they're all like crustily crammed into the corners of the pans, but they've also been replaced. The really shiny sheer wet look gold in the Moonlit Seduction palette is everything that Kava ever was and more. And Sparks, it's that white gold was never really my favorite. I feel like I get what I always wanted from this from the really shiny shade in Midnight Sun, but there actually is like a white gold shade just like this in Moonlit Seduction that's more like Sparks even. So I have these much fresher, better performing at this point versions of those, and I don't feel compelled to keep those old pans. It's wild to say goodbye to them though. The only other ones giving me pause are Lime Chrome and these kind of blue shades, which definitely define this palette. But I've never really liked the cream formula, and I've never really liked this one either. I always get frustrated by how thin and subtle it is. This is a really pretty shadow, but it's just, I mean, I'd be keeping them as novelties and not as things that I use a lot. And Lime Chrome, maybe I should keep it. I have Clionadh shadows that do what this does. And again, they've got more texture and are a little more satisfying to work with. And they're really like live wires still in my makeup collection, whereas this isn't. So that's it. I'm gonna keep these three shadows from the gold palette. Oh my goodness, if ever there was a time to be like, thank you for your service, you know what I mean? Like, thanks for all the memories. This is that time. I'm letting it go with joy. Okay, let's talk about e.l.f. Opposites Attract. So the primary use value of this palette for me is to like take it out and wave it around whenever there's a palette on the market that everyone's going bananas over, as an example of a drugstore version. Because for some reason, there are just a ton of palettes that kind of look like this, or a ton of palettes that come out for which there's a dupe for almost every shade in this palette. It's just super versatile. Again, like the balance of the tones is really good. The degree to which each one is pushed a little bit in the direction of grunge or a little bit in the direction of duskiness, it's really good. I think that the color story is just subtle. It's like, it's e.l.f., but the color story is high end. This mustard, this sort of foresty green, this very grungy kind of blackened brown. That looks exactly like with a little bit of purple. You know, that looks just like that shade in the Lila palette that I talked about really loving. We rarely see this much subtlety. It's like the Farrow and Ball paint colors. You know what I mean? We rarely see it at the drugstore price point, this kind of level of color intelligence. And for that reason, I very often find this as a useful, suggested alternative to buying something more expensive, but I don't really use it. I'm just out here using my Pat McGrath palettes almost exclusively all the time. So I don't need to keep this. Let it be known that this is a great drugstore palette. This is the last time that I'm going to remind you that it exists and it might be a great alternative to spending more on something else. It has served that purpose many a time, and now it's time for it to go. Okay, this amazing ZC palette. I really like the ZC eyeshadows, and I think it's pretty obvious why I've kept this palette all this time. It's because of this amazing thing that we have never seen the equal of. I actually also really like this one down here. I like that all over the lids as well. I wonder if I can get these out. I don't think they're removable, but that one felt kind of loose when I was swatching it. Swatch out, the orange kind of comes out of the gold, and it's really pretty on the eyes. You can build it up to basically be that, you know, but see how much more neutral it looks in the pan, and then the warmth kind of comes out of the gold when you swatch it. If I can get it out, I'll keep it, but if I can't, I'm okay with decluttering it. That little subtle quality of color makes me feel okay, more okay about parting with it. It came right out. It's not supposed to. There's glue in there, but I think the glue had just come loose. This one too. Yeah, that one I had to break the glue, but it was soft enough. I'm just using this paper towel to press them more firmly back in so they won't make a mess. There's still glue on the bottom of this one. I'm gonna have to stick magnets to them because they're not magnetized, but I have some spare magnets that I can do that with. Well, that was very satisfying. I feel like with the palettes that I've been keeping kind of just for one eyeshadow, I've, in most cases, been able to rescue that eyeshadow. Or, I mean, in the case of the gold palette, the 3, it's just Jungle Lights, from which I did not extract the 1. All right, this is another thing that I've been dreading. Like, when I think about this declutter, I think, oh my gosh, what do I do about Angie's palettes? It's my friend, Angelica Nyqvist. She is so good at designing palettes. And this is her collab with Kaleidos Club Nebula. And this is her collab with Odin's Eye. I actually use them kind of a lot because the formulas are good. And, well, here's what I do. I use like a third of each one of them kind of a lot. So what I tend to use in the Club Nebula palette is these purples. I just love the way that they blend out, these mattes. I also tend to reach for these blues a lot when I'm duping the vibes. And sometimes when I'm doing that, this palette will sort of push me out of my comfort zone. In this one, the Odin's Eye one, it's this dark shiny black that I absolutely can't get enough of. This dark plum, really sooty, incredible. The shade name is Soot, can't get enough. And River, which is like a shiny, you know, a banging duochrome or even a multi-chrome. It's funny, it's the mattes. And I mean, that's so Angie because she's amazing with colorful mattes and dark mattes. And even though matte shadows aren't what I tend to use, when I do want them, I want these sort of extremely well-formulated, subtly color-balanced, deep mattes. And she just knows what to pick. Like, she knows how to pick them when it comes to that category. So having these open before me, I'm realizing what happens is I'll be doing an eye look with something else, like one of my Pat McGrath palettes, and I will open this palette to use Soot and sometimes this shiny one, Complete, or I'll open this palette to use Cylon or Rockhopper, Queen of Blades, or sometimes Void. I do really like the packaging, especially of Club Nebula. It's really satisfying, solid, feels like an art piece, has that gorgeous Kaleidos artwork. This is also very beautiful just as a piece of art, but they don't really, how can I say this? The style, like stylistically, the packaging is kind of in a different aesthetic category than actually almost all the rest of the palettes that I'm keeping. Let's bring everything else back in order to finish making this decision. Everything else that I'm keeping. Okay, so this is too many for me. I know this is not what I had in mind when it comes to an eyeshadow edit. Right away, I think I now have the bravery to let go of Kaleidos Flower Punk, even though I just really love it as an object. My desire to really, really condense and whittle is coming into play now in this last wave, and it's helping me cut the cord. The other thing about it is that if I want color, I actually do have, in the funniest place, right? I have this kind of unusual for me blue. And even though these aren't, this is like sea green, teal, and this is like a glowing periwinkle, I so rarely go in this direction that to me, they kind of serve the same purpose. I'll happily use this one in the Gucci palette anytime I want something like that. So it's hard to declutter Angie's palettes, partly because I do find myself opening them and using them for these practical purposes time and time again. So they have qualities that I actually appreciate interacting with. They have use value for me. But it's also because she's my friend and she did such a great job, and these are like celebrations of her. And I don't want to like give the impression that I'm rejecting that or that I don't value that. You know, it's like an amplified version of having a sentimental attachment to something and making it hard to get rid of that thing in a declutter for that reason. And it helps me in that case to remember that I did dedicated video reviews of each one of these. So I did a whole video of this, doing a look with it, talking all about the color story and the formulas. Same thing with this one. I'll try to remember to link those down below. I think it's exceedingly clear in both of those videos that I think that she smashed it, but I think it makes sense. And I think it would also make sense to Angie, knowing like my style and the way that I use makeup, that for long-term practical use, there would just be a couple of shades, 1 or 2 shades in each one of these that would kind of fit with what I do. And in this moment, on the occasion of this declutter, I'm letting go of things that fit that definition for me in the day-to-day. They are great, and I'm so grateful that I got the chance to use and review them. But this right here is what I had in mind. This is an eyeshadow palette collection that I can consider every piece of every time I'm going to do my eyeshadow, that I can keep in a drawer. It's not even going to fill the drawer. It's just going to fill part of the drawer, that I can look at and touch every day or every time I do my makeup, and that I can use effortlessly over and over and over again without feeling like there's any kind of dead weight, anything extra being saved for later, saved for special occasions, stored on the side, anything like that. Is it going to make it harder for me to dupe the vibes sometimes? Yes, especially because I'm about to declutter my single eyeshadows as well, and I expect to be potentially equally ruthless. But that's okay. I hear from you all the time that you're surprised at how easy it is for you to dupe the vibes, even though you only have a couple of eyeshadow palettes. We like what we like, and when we're drawn to something and we want to recreate it on our own eyes, if we like it, it's probably the case that we already have something kind of like it. I think I will be able to dupe the vibes with what's here. But if I can't, if I find myself wanting to create certain makeup looks and I turn to this eyeshadow palette collection and I can't make the look that I'm imagining, if I can't dupe the vibes on camera, that'll tell me something, right? Maybe it'll tell me that I actually want a little bit of a more robust eyeshadow palette collection than I thought that I wanted. And then I'll act accordingly. But in this moment, I feel like I have everything that I need right here. The color story altogether is very pleasing to me as well, and it makes me feel even better about all of the decisions that I've made. So that is it. Wow, what a day. What a declutter. The single eyeshadows that I saved from some of these palettes I decluttered, they will feature soon in my single eyeshadow declutter. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be revisiting those. Palette-wise, this is it. I could not be more excited to put these palettes back in my makeup collection, to like find a place for them and use them from that place. I really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for spending all of this time with me. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to be subscribed, and don't forget to take extra good care of yourself so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.